After record flooding last fall, half of Montana is now facing a devastating drought. Today, MTN takes a look at the businesses, farmers, and families alike, all looking to the skies for answers.
You've been tracking this developing drought really for the past few months now. What are some
Every day it's going downhill.
And then the rain just shut off.
The worst drought it's seen in nearly 30 years.
The whole community lives and dies on rain.
It has been extremely dry so far.
But you can see it's gone now.
So we're dealing with some hot and dry
we've
air.
really seen the worst conditions, Shannon and Tim, in northeastern Montana.
We're at the mercy of not only the market, we're at the mercy of Mother Nature.
You normally sell, I don't know, 10, 12 balers, and I think we've maybe sold one this year, and it was pre-sold.
Shows a dismal start to the 2017 growing season.
It just is what it is. There isn't anything you can do about it. You just haven't had any help from Mother Nature.
Farmers in Montana are very resilient.
And just try to, hunker down during it.
We're going to get through it.
We'll be okay. We'll be okay.
From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Hello and welcome to Face the State. I'm meteorologist Mike Rawlins. Eastern Montana is facing its worst drought in nearly 30 years. Crops are dying, food is scarce, and money, it's hard to come by. This drought is having impacts not only across Montana, but around the United States. So how did we get here? Let's go back to the start of 2017 when things were in much better shape. A look at the U.S. Drought Monitor shows areas of moderate drought in western and eastern Montana, but again, these areas were very limited. This was back on January 1st of the year. We started off with near normal conditions, coming off of a record fall with historic flooding in portions of northeastern Montana. Many levels were way above normal in terms of rain amounts for this area. And then we fast forward to right now, where we're dealing with an exceptional drought for the first time since May 2005. You see the darker red colors on your screen indicating those areas of exceptional drought. This drought has progressed so quickly, it has caught so many people off guard. We're also seeing the areas of moderate, severe, and extreme drought expanding here in the eastern part of the state as well. Let's take you to Glasgow and a look back at June. This ranks as the third driest June on record for Glasgow, with just 0.14 of an inch of rain recorded there at Glasgow Airport. You can see all of the other numbers stacking up, only 1985, 1903 being lower than that in terms of rain amounts. For Glasgow, this was the third driest June on record, but it was also the driest May and June time period on record, the driest April, May, and June on record, and the driest start to the year, the first 6 months, the driest January through June on record ever. This is a look right now at the 60-day percent of normal precipitation. Areas where you see maybe the yellow, orange, or red. This is where going back 60 days or roughly 2 months, we only saw 10 to 25% of the normal precipitation, and it's in that same area right now that's dealing with a severe or extreme drought there, again in the northeastern corner of the state. When you go out 90 days or 3 months, you see something very similar, 25% of normal. You want those normal numbers to be up around 100%. This area did not see a lot of rain at all. So we go to May 18th when all of this really started. The U.S. Drought Monitor worsens week after week. We get a new drought monitor issued every Thursday, and you can see the introduction of extreme drought, the expansion of that, and now the introduction of exceptional drought again for the first time since 2005. The crop moisture index is atrocious right now. Look at all of the counties in severe drought or severely dry conditions here, and most of the state here is dry with no areas reporting above average. Let's go back to May. Just for an example, 8.58 inches of water beneath the ground, surface water, evaporated in the month of May in northeastern Montana. That same area only recorded 0.14 of an inch of rain, taking many by surprise. And a big part of that was the wind carrying away that moisture, wicking it out of the ground. And when we didn't get the rain we typically get in June and July, it really changed things up. This flash drought has taken many by surprise, and some are taking harsh criticism for it. Many farmers and ranchers wanted a drought designation sooner than it came, calling on weather experts and state officials to do more earlier. But I'm told the data just wasn't there. Representatives from Montana's Drought and Water Supply Advisory Committee say the incoming data was lagging behind by 2 or 3 weeks. And that meant the U.S. Drought Monitor was slow to show the developing drought, delaying state and federal aid for those who needed it.
We weren't expecting the type of impacts that we've been seeing so rapidly in the eastern part of the state. And it's been a good lesson in rapid onset drought, which Montana hasn't experienced very often until now.
The focus now is on making sure those being affected have the resources they need to make it through.
One of the things I'm often asked is, how can I let the U.S. Drought Monitor know that things are bad in my area? There is a resource online called the National Drought Impact Reporter. You can click on your state and enter in a report. What's most beneficial is to have the amount of acreage, for example, that's dry by how much percent. So out of my 1,000-acre farm, 50% of it is a complete loss to me. Things like that are really helpful.
The National Drought Mitigation Center is tasked with collecting reports from producers in order to assess the overall drought and its impacts. Check out just a couple of the latest reports from folks in that area. One says, I believe if it were to rain today, it is too late for most of the crops in our area. It is just too dry. Another writes, a lot of people will be out of the cow business this fall because rain simply will not fall from the sky. There are a lot of farmers and ranchers that are doing their day-to-day tasks in a state of depression. My place has had cows on it for 102 years, and I fear it will end at that. And the NDMC is asking for your help. If you and your livelihood are being affected by the drought, send in a report. We've created a special Drought Watch section on our website. There you will find a link to the NDMC Drought Impact Reporter page where you can submit your report. You can see that page right here. All of the counties lit up in yellow, orange, red. Those show where we have drought impact statements from farmers or ranchers in this area telling us what it's like. And you can submit a report too. That helps determine what areas of Montana are included in the U.S. Drought Monitor, which can ultimately deliver aid to those areas from state and federal resources. Glasgow, Montana is just one of the areas dealing with this flash drought, but the community is not giving up hope. I traveled there to talk with some of the farmers and ranchers who depend on Mother Nature for their livelihood. They tell me things are bad, but they could always be worse.
There's a whole generation of operators who've never seen it as dry as might be.
Lee Cornwell's family has been on this land since 1892, and they've weathered worse. But this year's flash drought is taking its toll.
But you can see it's gone now.
The land is drying up following the driest spring in 100 years. Crops aren't coming up, and there isn't much food for raising cattle.
The whole community lives and dies on rain, but I'm sure if you interview the business people in Glasgow, they're already feeling the effects of it.
And every day it's going downhill.
And farm equipment dealer Galen Zerby says it's already hurting his bottom line.
You normally sell, 10, 12 balers, and I think we've maybe sold one this year, and it was pre-sold.
Spring wheat is one of the hardest hit crops with a huge downturn in production. The U.S. Spring Wheat Condition Index shows a dismal start to the 2017 growing season with little hope in sight.
It's just bleak, but we're a tough community and we're going to get through it.
It's a little dry.
Former Sheriff Glenn Meyer says the 80s were worse, and he's staying optimistic despite a poor growing season.
Last year, easily, I put up 333 bales in what I custom hay here for myself every year on my own property. This year, I put up 22.5 bales.
And while the drought worsens day by day here, the community is staying strong.
We'll be okay. We'll be okay. It can always get worse, and I feel we'll just be fine. Every day we're closer to a flood, and every day we're closer to a good rainstorm.
In response to the developing drought, Governor Steve Bullock signed an executive order this week declaring a drought emergency in 28 counties and 5 Indian reservations. The emergency includes the entire eastern half of the state. The order allows the Department of Transportation to temporarily suspend hours of service regulations, cutting through red tape and allowing commercial trucks to travel more freely in the area. For example, those transporting hay to farms in that part of the state are able to do so overnight. Additional firefighting resources were also staged in the area as well in order to fight fires as they started. Governor Bullock has also directed all state agencies to work together to mitigate the effects the drought is having on the Treasure State. Among Montana's various crops, spring wheat and hard red spring wheat are taking the biggest hits. The rain needed to get that wheat to grow never came, leaving some fields barren with seed still sitting underneath the dry, cracked earth. Check out the U.S. Spring Wheat Condition Index. You'll see fantastic conditions over the past few years. And then there's 2017, a dismal start, with the numbers continuing to fall as the weeks go by. The only year worse, 1988. And that's what we continue to hear from farmers day after day. This year's drought is as bad as it was nearly 30 years ago.
Very concerned too, and our U.S. millers and bakers. About 80% of Montana's wheat is exported. So our regular customers in the Pacific Rim, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, they're looking at this drought situation too in a lower production year, and they're seeing prices rise with production declining, and they're getting concerned if the supply that they need is going to be there and how much it's going to cost them. This drought is really centered in our primary hard red spring growing area. That's the quality bread baking wheat for the whole United States. Hard red spring wheat is grown in North Dakota and eastern Montana. So that's the supply that's going to be very short, and that's what our millers and bakers are very concerned about. They will look at alternatives. They'll look at what the Canadian crop is. They'll look at higher protein hard red winter wheat, which is not down as much, although acres are down, so production is down quite a little with winter wheat. But they'll look at substituting something else for that hard red spring wheat if that supply isn't there.
This week, spring wheat conditions nationwide declined by another 1 percentage point, with just 34% of the crop rated good to excellent last week. Here in Montana, the drought is taking its toll too, with just 16% of the crop rated in good to excellent condition compared to last year's 65%. And with many fields estimated to yield less than 10 bushels per acre, growers are opting to collect crop insurance rather than harvest this year. Each week, the USDA releases a report showing the progress of all of Montana's crops, and each week things seem to get a little worse. Check out the grim stats. 88% of Montana's topsoil moisture is rated very short to short, and the subsoil moisture numbers aren't any better. 80% rated very short to short. 58% of Montana's rangeland and pastures are rated as very poor to poor. Barley and corn crops are also taking a hit, with declining numbers across the board. This drought doesn't just impact the lives of farmers and ranchers, its effects can be felt statewide. According to the Montana Grain Growers Association, we're told to expect millions of dollars in lost revenue as crops wither. The Montana Stock Growers Association expects losses too as ranchers sell off cattle. Experts also tell us they are expecting bankruptcies and foreclosures in the coming months.
In the end, I think it will impact all of Montana because of the severity of the impacts to our agricultural producers out east, who really do produce a lot of Montana's, especially spring wheat.
It has a very large economic impact, especially in our small towns. You know, and not to say that towns like Great Falls aren't affected, because a lot of businesses in Montana rely on the rural economy as well. But if there's less Montana coming, or less income coming to the farmers, that's less money that they can spend at all of the businesses in the small towns across Montana.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture has also authorized emergency haying on Conservation Reserve Program lands. That began back on Sunday, July 16th. The order affects those counties experiencing at least D2 or severe drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor. The increased demand for hay has depleted already low levels of hay stock. In fact, Montana and North Dakota are reporting the lowest hay stock since 2013. Landowners who are interested in emergency haying need to contact their local Farm Service Agency office to obtain a modified conservation plan. Eligible producers can hay their acreage for their own use or can grant another producer use of the CRP land for haying purposes. Last month, Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue authorized emergency grazing of CRP acres through September 30th unless conditions improve. And there are other disaster assistance programs available for farmers and ranchers. The FSA Farm Loan Livestock Physical Control Requirement Flexibility authorizes up to a 12-month exemption to the FSA farm loan requirement. That allows livestock producers to send livestock to feedlots, dry lots, or relocate them to where feed and water are available. Small non-farm businesses in 13 Montana counties are now eligible to apply for federal disaster loans because of the drought. That announcement was made back in June by the U.S. Small Business Administration. Economic injury disaster loans cover up to $2 million to help meet financial obligations and expenses which could have been met had the drought not occurred. These loans do not cover businesses primarily engaged in farming because financial aid has already been set aside for farmers and ranchers. To apply for a loan, you can download an application online, and we've included a link to it on our website. In recent weeks, we've heard from some ranchers that they've had to sell off cow-calf pairs. Many ranches have been handed down from generation to generation, and they're just praying for rain to hold on.
It'll take care of you if you take care of it, you know, if you try not to use it too hard, but sometimes your optimism gets ahead of you a little bit.
Well, those of us in agriculture, whether it's wheat or cattle, certainly in the state of Montana, you know, we're at the mercy of not only the market, but we're at the mercy of Mother Nature.
It takes 3/4 as much money to run a ranch where there's nothing on it as it does to have the cattle there, you know, because you got to pay the taxes and feed the family, and, you know, when you stop, you don't really stop. It's kind of attrition, you know, that eats you up.
Most of us that have been doing a long enough time, it's just something that we kind of gear up for. It's not fun, but we just kind of work through it. And so when you hear about people selling down their herd, you know, the one thing is that, you know, that does bring some money in, you know, so you're selling down, you're bringing in some income. Maybe you're banking that for the next year and maybe helping you get through that next year. Some of the downsides with that obviously are, you know, that you have no cattle to generate revenue the next year. And one of the things that I've learned over the time is that when you have these herds of cattle, then you've spent all this money and investment in raising good genetics and things like that. You sell that, and then you don't just get to come back in. I mean, some of these ranches, you know, have, 50, 60 years of these genetics that they've really been working on. So it's sad to see them have to sell those and then kind of start back over.
Obviously, this isn't the first time Montana has dealt with drought, and it won't be the last. But every time the state faces hardship, there are lessons to be learned. We can't control Mother Nature, but we can adapt and prepare for what's thrown at us. And that's the message that ag and weather experts want you to hear. You can't prevent drought, but you can certainly prepare for it.
We've had a history of 10-year cycles, drought cycles in Montana, and it's very devastating.
Drought is not preventable. It is part of the ecosystem. It's part of where we live. However, there are things you can do to manage for drought, and some of that takes some education, and I highly encourage folks to talk with their extension agents and their farm service agents. They have a lot of resources to use when thinking about soil health, pasture management. How do you take care of your land so that it is more resilient in a time of drought?
You look at your management practices. You may tend, instead of continuous cropping, growing a crop on that soil every year, you may cut back on that and plant maybe just half of your ground and summer follow the rest in order to try and conserve some of that moisture for the following year. You may look at more drought-tolerant crops. You may change your rotation. You're certainly going to cut back on expenses, which tends to affect the entire economy of Montana because we're such a rural state. So Main Street Montana starts to feel that, and it gets to be a snowball effect.
On our operation, we actually plan our whole year of grazing out back the year before. We're planning it that far in advance and ahead. We're already making plans for 2018 right now. A lot of things we've done on our ranch is, you know, we've electric fenced certain areas where we know there's good water. So, you know, we might be moving our cattle more, but we're kind of we're seeing that. We're seeing what's going on and preparing for that.
One of the things that can also be an opportunity is to talk with your community. Are there ways that you could come up with a drought response plan at the local level that will be more immediate and provide for some resources that the state is not in a position to be able to do?
The drought is also having a direct impact on Montana's fire season. Fuels dried much sooner than usual in some areas, and fuel moisture levels are at all-time lows in the eastern part of the state. Let's look at the active wildfires here across the West. These are the large incidents, as we call them, larger than 100 acres in size right now, and there are a lot of them, several of them here in Montana. After a fairly slow start to fire season, we've seen things really ramp up here in the last couple of weeks. Now, looking at the statistics for Montana, using a 10-year average, we see more than 1,700 wildfires across the state, burning more than 311,000 acres of land. That's the 10-year average. So far this year, 923 fires, burning nearly 60,000 acres of land. Where does that compare to years past? Well, the benchmark year, 2015, when we burned more than 351,000 acres of land. We go back here to 2016. Last year, the state only burned 113,000 acres of land. Now remember, these wildfires are either human-caused or lightning-caused, and as we look forward, things are not looking spectacular. This was the outlook from the National Interagency Fire Center for the month of July. And you see the red indicating above average fire potential for the eastern half of the state, in a direct effect from the developing drought. Now going forward to, say, August, same thing. More red on the map for the eastern part of the state. But we've also been pinpointing the northwestern corner of the state. With drier than average conditions in recent weeks, we now expect to see above average fire potential there. Now looking forward all the way to September through October, the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise calling for above average fire potential in the eastern part of the state still, with normal fire conditions for central and western sections of the state here. But again, we're going to be monitoring the northwestern corner of the state for drier than average conditions, which could play a big role in the overall fire danger as we go forward here into the next couple of months. And of course, we've got to talk about fire restrictions as well. With increasing fire danger comes those fire restrictions. We see them every year, but there are more than usual this year because of the unusually dry conditions. The long, hot summer days are drying out the grasses, shrubs, and trees, increasing the danger, prompting authorities to implement those restrictions. You can see here, virtually all of eastern Montana is now under a Stage 1 fire restriction. Elsewhere, there are local burn bans in effect until further notice. Let's talk about what those restrictions mean. Stage 1 fire restrictions apply to campfires and smoking. It's illegal to start or maintain a campfire unless you're in a developed recreation site using a fire ring or at an improved site. Also, smoking is prohibited unless you're in an enclosed vehicle or in an area at least 3 feet in diameter that is cleared of all flammable materials. Stage 2 fire restrictions are used when the fire danger becomes very high. Campfires are not allowed at all. Welding or using an open flame becomes illegal, and operating any sort of internal combustion engine like a chainsaw or ATV without a spark arresting device is prohibited. Currently, Yellowstone County is the only county in the state under Stage 2 restrictions. Now, should the fire danger become extreme, state and local officials can choose to issue a complete closure. That would ban anyone from entering the closure area altogether. It's a worst-case scenario used when Stage 2 restrictions aren't effective enough in stopping human-caused fires. Closures are rather rare, and there are none in effect for Montana. So where do we go from here? We're almost in August, and very little rain has fallen in the eastern part of the state this summer. I'm told most farmers are now just trying to make it through the rest of the year and are already focusing on next year's growing season. But when will the rains come? Let's talk long term. We just received the August outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, and it's not great news, especially for eastern Montana. North and South Dakota. The Climate Prediction Center for the month of August is calling for warmer than average temperatures, and as we know, it has been a hot summer so far. Those warmer than average temperatures could help to cure fuels even more than they already are, drying things out and creating more kindling for fire. So a 50% chance that August will be warmer than average for the eastern part of the state, parts of Wyoming, North and South Dakota. Now, looking at the precipitation probabilities, the signals are not very clear. CPC calling for equal chances now of normal, above average, or below average. So what we're saying is there are no clear signals as to whether or not it's going to be wetter or drier here across much of the northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest as we go through the month of August. But there is a 33% chance that parts of Idaho and Wyoming will end up being wetter than average, something that we'll have to keep a close watch on. All right, let's go long term. This is the old July through September outlook, and I want to show you this because there are some interesting points to be brought. The chance of warmer than average temperatures for July, August, and September were equal across Montana. So far, it has been a very hot start, of course, to late summer, and that is expected now to continue. So that has thrown many off guard because we were not really expecting to see this, especially with temperatures being so warm. And then you look at the chances for wetter than average conditions. This not lining up with what we're seeing so far. Now, things may change in late August or say September, but right now this is hard to come by. A 33 to 40% chance that eastern Montana, North Dakota, and parts of South Dakota experience a wetter than average end of summer and start to fall, while the rest of the Pacific Northwest experiences equal chances. And that has been very difficult to understand. We have to look at El Nino and talk about some of the things here. Remember, El Nino is the warmer than normal waters of the equatorial Pacific. La Nina, cooler than normal. And then you have neutral conditions when the average sea surface temperatures are right where they should be. So what does that mean for winter looking ahead? Should we enter a neutral winter pattern? That would mean that the polar jet stream comes crashing into the, say, northern plains, allowing cold air to dive into the Great Lakes and into the Northeast, leaving us here in the West sort of in limbo. La Nina looks like this. When we get everything aimed right at the Pacific Northwest, the cold air arrives from Canada, the wetter than average conditions here right off the Pacific Northwest, and then there's El Nino, a worst case scenario as we go into winter this year. It's when an area of low pressure develops out in the Pacific. The polar jet is stuck way to the north, the jet stream down to the south, too far away to bring us much moisture. We are left warm and dry here in Montana. So here are some points to take away. No one predicted this. This was a normal wet spring expected. Then the rain never came. We were looking at near climate signals. There are none. There are no clear climate signals helping define this forecast, and that has been tough for us. So we proceed with caution. Long-term forecasts right now still appear incorrect, but we are monitoring things carefully to know what lies ahead. The drought will certainly have a lasting impact on the people of this great state. Those who've never witnessed conditions like these will learn and adapt for next time. Those of us tasked with predicting what Mother Nature will do next will use this as an opportunity to do better. Our community thrives and fails on its well-being. And just like every other drought, we'll band together to get through it. Our Drought Watch coverage doesn't end here. You'll find continuous coverage on our websites and in our daily newscasts. For Face the State, I'm Mike Rawlins, and for all of us at the Montana Television Network, thanks for watching.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.